Hi, I'm Gus Firth. I'm managing consultant at Source Technology, and you're listening to our brand new podcast, Source Talks, the Tech Lab. In this series, we bring you insightful discussions with some of the most talented leaders in tech. Our mission is simple: to provide value to you, our listener. We'll give you the opportunity to hear from these leaders in a more intimate setting where you can come together to discuss hot topics, market trends, and key challenges facing the software engineering space. Ultimately, our aim is to offer you practical insights and tangible solutions that you can apply to your own business context. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out in the field, we promise to you to deliver content that you can learn from. Today, I'm joined by Phil. Phil joined Kilo Health 4 months ago as their new director of engineering in Berlin. Kilo is one of the fastest growing companies in Europe at the moment, and they develop digital health and tech products. Phil has a blog named Software is Easy, People Are Hard, which we will focus our core discussion around, touching on the topics of team and relationship building, psychological safety, inclusion, and social support networks. This is Dusty, and he cannot wait to hear the rest of the podcast. I will see you when Phil joins. Thank you very much. How are we doing, mate?
I'm good. I'm in Lithuania today. So I'm enjoying what is actually quite nice, a little bit cold, but quite nice weather today.
Lovely. It would be great just to explain some of your stories so far. I guess we'll start off why you're sitting in Lithuania, and we can go from there, mate.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that. So I'm in Lithuania because this is HQ for Kilo Health. Kilo Health is based. Our main offices are in Vilnius, and I visited this week. We have an event tomorrow which I'm hosting, so I'm in the city to do that. But how I came to be connected to a Lithuanian company is kind of interesting. Well, I don't know whether it's really that interesting, honestly. I just made a transition from another company, Klarna, at the end of last year. And as I was looking around, seeing what's out there, like Kilo Health popped up on LinkedIn. And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. Thinking around like health tech being a bit more of a bit of a purpose-driven kind of a topic. And had a quick catch up with their talent acquisition, and it worked out. So that's why I'm here. There's no grand master plan or anything. It was that simple. Kilo Health popped up on LinkedIn. Now I'm here.
Nice. And we'll obviously get into what you're doing at Kilo Health and the sort of some of the things that you're implementing there, which would be great. But first, could you just tell us a little bit? And I like to do this with all the guests. Just tell us a little bit about your sort of journey into the tech industry, from where software sort of first captured your heart, I imagine, to where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, how far back do we want to go? Let's go. I mean, we can go right back to the beginning. So both of my parents were software engineers, and I did the very traditional teenage thing of rebelling against that and saying like, no, there's no possible way that I'm getting involved in software engineering. And I started to study and went down a very creative route, looking at like GCSE. I was looking at drama and art and these kind of topics. And then, as kind of part of that, firstly, I realized I was not very good at those kind of topics. But the second part is I got very interested in creating music and started to look at software that could be used to generate and produce music. Started to get interested in like VSTs, which are sort of like these virtual software synthesizer type things. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And then I discovered that you could make them by coding. And I was like, right, okay, now I start to see understand the point of software engineering. Then this point being not the doing, but what you can actually create, and the things that, you know, the output of software engineering is what's actually the interesting part of it, right? So becoming less interested in the actual code and the technical part of it, but actually thinking about what you can achieve. And then that's probably what sparked my initial interest. And then I started to sort of play around with some stuff when I was younger in terms of just fiddling around with code and these kind of things. And then that built into a career. I started as working in quite large. I worked for British Telecom actually when I left university, doing big corporate stuff. Realized that was hideous at the time, or at least at the time for me personally. And then I started freelancing, doing some like e-commerce type stuff, building little e-commerce websites. that developed into running my own agency, that then developed into working for agencies and doing working in the kind of agency, development agency, marketing agency kind of space. And then about 6 years ago, I love working in agency, but there are some stresses and strains that come with that I was like, you know what, maybe I'm too old for putting in these number of hours. And I moved over to product, and that's where I joined Klarna, and then subsequently joined Kelo. So that's been my journey.
Nice. And just for the viewers listening as well, could we learn a bit about what you're up to at Klarna? And I think you were there for nearly 4 years, correct?
Yeah. So I joined Klarna as an engineering manager, and joined Klarna at a point where they were going through like hyper growth, and so things kind of progressed very quickly. And by the time I left Klarna, I was a what they call a group accountable lead, which means I was kind of responsible for the overarching group and not just the engineering, product design inside of that group as well. And we were kind of focusing on the merchant presence within the app. So where you see a brand or a company identity within the Klarna app, that's what I was focusing on whilst I was there.
Makes sense. And at your time in Klarna, what's some of the sort of key values that you've learned that you're now kind of taking to Kelo? Quite a heavy question.
I think, no. I think that it's quite an easy question to answer, because the most interesting thing about Klarna is that the core business, that whatever is presented on the outside in terms of supporting shopping or buy now, pay later, the core business of Klarna is risk assessment. So they are taking this, taking a risk and making a decision where they want to lend money to someone, right? And that's the core fundamental business. And what happens then is, because that is the core business, it bleeds out into kind of every aspect of how Klarna works. And it really helped me. What I really learned at Klarna was that every decision you make is a risk assessment. So thinking about that in that way, and thinking like, well, if I make this decision, what are the inputs? What is the output? What's the likelihood of these outcomes? Really, I think, really changed how I work, and that can be applied for all sorts of things in terms of how you lead people, product decisions, engineering decisions, and I think I was probably doing these things. So you build up a backlog of experiences, right? And then you kind of like call on those backlog experiences when you make decisions. And sometimes it becomes sort of subconscious sometimes when you make these decisions, but then actually sitting down and thinking like, oh, what am I actually thinking? What is the risk assessment I'm taking? What is the real decision that I'm making here? What is going to be the impact of making this decision? And thinking about that, or trying. You can't do it all the time, right? It's not like I'm like sat in a phone booth. Which phone booth do I take? What are the risks involved in picking that specific phone booth, right? That's not on that level, but on kind of more important questions, think about everything as a risk assessment. Really enlightened how I think about a lot of topics. So that was probably the core thing that I learned from Klarna. And then also there's these additional things. Being in a hyper-growth company is a really interesting challenge to deal with. There are things that I hadn't really experienced or thought about or come across when I came into that situation as well.
And that's really interesting. You're talking about the sort of, hyper-growth. Klarna is very well known in the Berlin space, and now probably, across the world. There are obviously unfortunate circumstances with a lot of the tech layoffs that sort of... I don't know how comfortable you are in commenting on this, but the whole Klarna-geddon sort of phrase that was coined. How much sort of authority or information do you have about that? Do you think it was like a kind of root cause? Do you think they got kind of caught up with a lot of other similar companies?
How now I have to make a risk assessment, right? How honest and open about this should I be? What's the implications on my personal network and my career going forwards about how I talk about this? I think, firstly, don't believe everything you read in the media, for absolutely sure. I read a lot of stuff around the time about how Klarna operated and the things that were going on there, which I was still working there. I was like, I can't relate to this. This is not my experience. Maybe this is someone's experience of what's going on, but it was definitely not my experience about what was going on. And I think
Yeah, that's a great summary, and it is very interesting what you say about these big decisions being made in the moment being so important. Mm-hmm. Whereas from the outside perspective, you're just seeing like, oh, okay, this is the first company that's just getting rid of everyone. Like, what's going on? Whereas you go back to this sort of, every decision is a risk-based assessment. That this is like the biggest decision, like, and it's a decision that you have nothing to, you can't compare it to anything, right? And it's also interesting what you said about this new sort of wave that is created as sort of like those companies that weren't making any money and revenue before, they might have had good pitches, and that's why people were just, chucking investment at them. And yeah, it's changed the whole landscape. And Klarna's still alive and kicking. So that's all good. In terms of, let's move on to your sort of new role. What was it about Kilo Health that made you want to join them?
I think there's an interesting, and this is I have to be careful about this because I don't want to present Klarna in any kind of negative light, and because there isn't anything really good. But when you join a company, you make some you never align 100% with the ideals of the company, right? There is no way. You're always going to be something's not going to fit quite right. There's going to be something that you don't agree with, but you have to put that to one side and align with the company. Or you make two decisions, right? You either try and go in and influence and change, or you say, okay, fine, this is the thing that I'm not comfortable with, like I don't necessarily believe in, but I'm going to forget about that and focus on the other topics. You have to do that. And then when I joined Klarna, the selling credit was never high on my list of things that I was excited about doing as a potential industry, right? But there were some super exciting things inside Klarna in terms of the people and the technology that we were working on. So I was like, right, I'll focus on that, and this is really cool. And there were I'd never been in an organization where everybody I met immediately were like, I know exactly why you're here. I see what you're bringing to the table. And Klarna was full of incredibly talented people at the time, and that was super exciting. So you kind of park that slight discomfort about the business model that they're applying. And then over time, it started to creep in. I was like, I'm not super aligned with this. Like, I don't think this is exactly the thing that I'm getting super excited about. So I was like, maybe I need to look for something with a little bit more purpose, something where I feel that I am contributing a net positive to the world. Kelo came up, and obviously health tech is, and I'm not trying to pretend like Kelo is some sort of completely altruistic company. We have to make money at the end of the day, but we're making money by helping people get healthier, lose weight, get fitter, change their habits, and those kind of things. So like, it's definitely not a detrimental product that we are creating, and that feels a lot better. And that's purpose-driven approach was kind of the reason why I kind of moved to Kelo in the first place. And then since then, some really interesting challenges have popped up at Kelo. So I am excited about the future.
Nice. And you've been there 4 months now. Could you give us your best elevator pitch on Kelo Health and how it's transforming the world?
How it's transforming the world? I think the really interesting thing about Kelo, and I don't know whether it's transforming the world, but I think if we get it right, there's going to be something really interesting from business and tech point of view. Kelo is made up of a lot of companies at very different stages in their growth, or not companies, or teams of companies, because everything is kind of like treated like its own company, its own product. So every product is kind of run as its own little business to give them autonomy and make them excited about the product. And what that means is, as a company, we have a situation where we have like a company that's existed, a product that's existed for 3 years, is fairly mature, is profitable, is making some money. And then we have like a chaotic early stage startup that is just like, trying to keep the lights on, trying to work out what the next day brings, and then trying to work out how we support all of those companies in all those different stages is super exciting. And if we can get that right and build a model that allows us to support, understand how companies grow from a technology point of view and support them. We have some ideas, but if we can get it right, I think that would be really interesting. And also, because we are a profitable company, and that's something that's kind of key to it, if we can try to share that model and apply that model in terms of like avoiding this kind of like VC funding bubble type thing, I think there's something super interesting there to potentially. And I'd be hoping like a couple of years time we can be telling a really interesting story about how we've cracked that problem, and we can build sustainable, profitable companies that grow with a little less pain than a lot of early stage startups go through. So that's what I hope we'll get to. But there's some interesting things going on as well.
Nice. Obviously, like you said, it's the start of a very important journey, and that's great. I mean, when we last spoke, something that was really interesting to me was you mentioned you followed this Michael Watkins book, The First 90 Days.
Yes, this is incredible. This is an incredible book, and I thoroughly recommend anyone read this book starting a new position, even if it's an internal move or starting a new job. It's more applicable to leadership style positions, but I think anyone can kind of learn anything from it. And what it really kind of preaches is it talks about breaking down your first 90 days, and the first into kind of 3 chunks. And the first 30 days is literally listen. Sit and listen. Don't try and do anything. Make sure that you're understanding the context, because it's so easy to come into a position and go, oh, that doesn't look right. That doesn't look right. We should do this. That's like that. And then everyone's like, who is this new guy? Like, get out of here. Like, you've not built any trust. Why should we listen to you, right? So listen, then align, and then start to try and make changes. So that's the kind of model of the book. But coming back to what we talked about before, what is really interesting in that book is there is a STAR model, which talks about the different stages of a business unit. And then that's kind of what was really interesting to me when joining Kelo, because the book talks about like that you should assess where your organization is. Is it a startup? Is it, now I'm not going to be able to remember what the acronym is. It's startup, turnaround, accelerated growth, sustained growth, and there's another one which I can't remember. But anyway, so there's these stages. It's like depending on where they are in this model, you apply different things and you think about different things. And I sat down when I joined Kelo and I was like, right, I need to be able to apply the thinking in this book, I have to define where it sits within this category. And I was like, wait, I have business units in every single one of those stages. Like every single one of those stages that I have a product in this thing. So that's where it started to really resonate with me, that how do we support all of those different types of businesses in different types of products? Because you kind of like, and using an example, right? If we're talking about a very technical kind of thing, if we talk about scalability in your infrastructure, like whether your infrastructure is horizontally scalable, vertically scalable, whatever, that's a lovely problem to have when you're a growing company or you're a more mature company. But if you sit down as a startup and go, right, I need to make my Kubernetes AWS scalable cluster, and it's going to be perfect and amazing, and you spend like 4 weeks building this like infrastructure, your company's dead. It's done. It's gone. Right? You have to make these compromises, and supporting those companies make educated compromises is a really interesting problem to have.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just how you sort of break it down as well. You know, you mentioned before about the different like business units inside Kelo. So I imagine it's actually part of the challenge is just being like where are we at the moment, and what do we have to implement? That's really interesting. In terms of like the core discussion around today's topic, you know, hopefully we'll uncover some. I mentioned at the start of the intro an article that you've been working on at the moment. Is your organization a pencil or a diamond? Could you give us some context first to the title, and then a bit of an abstract?
Yes. The title is a massively labored analogy for sure, but it's like it talks about, so the core component of a pencil is graphite, and diamonds and graphites are all carbon basically, right? But just in different molecular forms. And carbon is a loosely connected groups. So it has like these, and it's very hard to describe, but it has like groups of connected molecules, and then they're loosely connected to the next group, right? And that's why when you draw with graphite, the molecules break off, right? And diamonds have every molecule is connected tightly to 4 other molecules, which is then creates this like really strong structure. And as I was kind of thinking about the organizations and the groups we have, like there is a big difference between having like multiple connected, like you have teams that are tightly connected, but if they're not connected to each other in a strong way, your organization is not as strong as if you tightly couple and everybody has some kind of connected support. So that's the labored analogy. And then as I started to think about this, I started to think about the topic about what is strength within an organization. And there is so much talk about, as we like, work is hard and work gets harder, and it seems to, as we progress like through history, it just seems there are more challenges, there is more stress, there is more pressure, and life is hard as well. As we pick up the pace of stuff, like balancing these kind of things starts to get a big pressure. And then over the last sort of like couple of decades, people have been starting to talk about resilience and individual resilience and growth mindsets and grit and these kind of determination things, and trying to model and support people in those kind of help them become individually strong. And I started to feel a bit skeptical about this. I read an amazing book by Bruce Dacey, a book called Fortitude, which talks a lot about this. And I was kind of like, this is really, there's something fundamentally underlying this that doesn't quite make sense, and it feels a little bit weird. And then if you think a little bit about the social structures of groups and group dynamics, things are much stronger when people are socially connected to each other, right? People have a support network. There is this kind of like social connection between people makes a unit much more, makes it stronger. So if you kind of then think about the strength in the organization being these connections, these relationships between people, and how you build and connect people, even the ones that don't have a specific reason to be talking to each other, you end up with a much stronger organization where people are supported by multiple people and therefore feel like that they can achieve more. And there is lots of scientific evidence to show that groups of people are collectively better than the sum of the individuals is less than the other way around, right? The collective group is stronger than the sum of the individuals within them on multiple levels. There's research into collective intelligence, which shows that problem solving in a group is much quicker, like, than if you take the individual separately. And then there is some like really interesting sports studies in terms of groups and teams that are connected socially can endure more pain. Interestingly, they can suffer, they can push themselves through stronger pain barriers, and sports teams work better when they have this like tight social bond. So trying to connect and model those things within an organization is super interesting to me. And I think there's some sort of simple ways that you can actually just model it and see what the strength of your team actually is.
And that's all in Fortitude, is it, where it talks about those sort of tight social bonds and the different studies?
It talks about group, it talks about this group connection, and some of the researchers in there. There's another book as well, which I find really that kind of complements this kind of concept, which is I can't remember the author. It might be Matt Lieberman, but it's called Social: How Our Brains Are Designed to Connect. And that's a really interesting book if you want to understand how this social bond and this social connection, like the scientific evidence behind these social groupings and stuff.
That's great. I'll check that out. Who was it? Matt?
I think the author is Matt Lieberman, but the brain is called Social: How Our Brains Are Designed to Connect, or something.
Nice. I'll look that up. In terms of sort of, you mentioned these connections, right? Visualizing these connections and the sort of teams and interconnections, even outside of teams, I guess. What are some of the effective ways, Phil, to sort of visualize these connections within a team and organization? Like how would we start mapping that out?
Measuring it, and this is something that I've been really I was really kind of intrigued by, because as I read all this like scientific research and stuff, they do these complicated experiments and stuff, which like you definitely shouldn't be trying to do in a workplace. Like, you definitely shouldn't be doing psychological studies in a workplace environment. That's not ethically correct. So I was kind of trying to think about how we understand it, and we draw these hierarchical organizational structures, right? Manager, reports of sub-reports, etc. And a lot of the time when we try and understand an organization, we measure it in that way. We get people to like either review downwards or review upwards and kind of say, is my boss doing a good job? Are my reports doing a good job? And then also, whenever we do any kind of like analysis of teams, we do it in the same way. You sum up the group together, right? So it's this kind of summing of the individuals rather than the connections between them. So I kind of started thinking about it, and I thought, what you need to do is you need to measure the connection between everybody in the group. So if you draw it as like a big, like a graph, like a computer type graph, not a line graph, you have the nodes, and there's a connection between everyone, and you draw out this complicated connection. And then it's like, there's a mathematical form, which is like, I think it's like n-1 over n times 2 or something is the number, or n times, I can't remember, but there's a mathematical formula that shows you the number of connections in a group of people, right? And then if you ask two very simple questions, you can understand the strength of that relationship. And the questions are, and you can change, and depending on what you really want to look at, you can change this, but you ask the individual about the other, to rank all the other people, say, how dependent are you on this person? How much do you rely on this person? And then how much do they support you in that dependency? Easy, right? Easy questions to answer. I know this person is like, I really depend on this person. 5 out of 5, I need this person to do my job well, or enjoy my job, or however. You can think about how you model it. And then you take, given a rating 0 to 5, in terms of how well they support you. So if this person is doing their job perfectly, they're supporting you 5 out of 5, great. The strength of the thing is 5 minus those two things coupled, so it's 5, right? If there is a discrepancy in the thing, if you require a significant amount of support from an individual and they're not giving it to you, you get a much larger number in the difference of that number. And that shows the higher the number, the worse the discrepancy, and the worse or you can, but it depends how you want to model it, but you can get a number, you get a value, which is either, you can either invert it so it's high or it's negative. So and then once you've got that number, you can do some really interesting things. You have a big set of you've measured your network, and you've measured all the connections, so you can define there's two things that you can potentially do. You can sum them up and get a score for your group. So you can say, as a percentage, we have all of these connections. If they're all perfect, it will be 100%. But if they're not, like, we are 80% in terms of fulfilling, I think. So you can look at the group as a whole and say, which is really useful for comparing and contrasting. So if you then implement some processes or some sort of initiatives, you can say, like, we were 80% then, we've done some things, now we're 100%. Amazing. You'll never be 100%, but you can see the improvements. Or you can start to do some interesting data mapping. So you can model these kind of, like, I guess they're matrices of data in certain different ways. And on a podcast, using words is very difficult to say, but there is a type of graph called a ribbon graph, which you kind of like map the connections, and the connections between the people is your connections, but then the width of the arrow becomes the either how good the relationship or how bad the relationship. So you can quickly see who is really dependent on who is not fulfilling the dependencies on them, who is maybe, like, if you map the need, you could see maybe that, like, there is a node in your network or a person in your network who has a significant dependency. And that could be one of two things. Either they're just really good and everybody's relying on them because this person's so great, or you've modeled it in the wrong way, or you've not modeled it, but you've set your organization up in the wrong way, that you've got this single person who everybody is dependent on, and then you need to kind of adjust. And you can see, really easily visualize how the internal network of this team, how the internal strength is, who are the key factors, who maybe also, if you model this data, you can also think about who isn't. If no one depends on a person in the team, why is that person in the team? Right, like, and you may not have noticed it before, right? Because this person, happens to be working on the same thing as you, right? And you think, oh, they're working on the same problem space. That makes sense that they're in the same team, but maybe they're just not. Maybe they're just an isolated individual, and then you can think about structures as well to kind of support that. So yeah, so it's really the questions are really easy, but then you have so much data and such a wealth of knowledge that it's really, really, really helpful. I've used it in the past to kind of seen some really interesting things in teams identify. And I think what tends to be the thing that pops up is these these big dependencies within a group. There'll be sometimes one or two people who isn't the lead of the group that people are super dependent on. Okay. And then you have to kind of like think about what that really means. Is that good? Or should that person be, maybe that person is actually the lead of the team, and maybe you should formalize that and change the structure a little bit. So that's really interesting to see.
That's interesting about the dependencies, right? Because I imagine an easy way to uncover a lot of like bottlenecks in terms of, we've got Jimmy here sitting doing 9 people's work and things and funneling it. You use like different colors with the connections, right? So they're either like thick or thin lines depending on like dependency, and then the different colors for
the colors are you normally define the color as being the person. So a person so you can follow in the graph, like Jimmy is red, and you can see the red graphs are the ones that relate to Jimmy and or whatever. So that's just the color coding is just the categorization of the people, so it's easier to read. So if all the arrows were the same color, it'd be a bit of a struggle. But the width is the important thing. The width and where they're going is the key part of it.
Interesting. And out of interest, what are some of the maybe surprising things that you've like uncovered initially that you sort of didn't expect?
So this it's really hard to get away from it. The tendency seems to be that you have a lead in the team who's not officially the lead. That's what happens a lot. The other thing I think that's come up a couple of times is there's situations, as I just touched on, where there's just people who have no dependencies on them. There's no dependency on the person, that person, or very light dependencies on the person, and it's like, why are they even there? And not in like any kind of offensive way, but your structure is wrong, right? That person just doesn't fit within the team, and it's been better. We've been able to find other ways, or splitting teams. There was an example that actually was really useful, was where we had a team that was clumped that we put together because we felt that it made sense. But when you mapped it, there was like 2 clusters of dependencies. So there was like a dependency on the lead, but everybody else was dependent in 2 clusters. So you had 2 teams. So you had 2 teams within the same organization. So that was really easy to spot that as well. So there's lots of things. And then that's more about the structures. Then there is like, it's able to what is less interesting, but very useful, is being able to spot where people aren't fulfilling needs. So where you've got a situation where, and it's not always underperformance, can be underperformance, but it's not always underperformance. It's just, you may have a situation where someone, like, there is a key expertise in your team that you need, especially when you talk about technical stuff. Like it might be a language or a technology that you need, and everybody is kind of dependent on that person, and you've got one knowledge base and everyone is still relying on that person. So how do you share the knowledge out? How do you spread it out so you don't have that kind of like single point of dependency or single load, all that dependency load on that person, right? Because they also still have to get their stuff done as well. So those kind of things have popped up a couple of times in this thing. But it's really helpful way of modeling and visualizing this stuff.
That's interesting. I mean, it's interesting what you say about the tendencies that you uncover people that, you know, people almost see it as the tech lead, right? And it's funny because what do they say about leaders? It's like they don't, the best leaders don't actually want to have anything to do with being a leader, you know?
Yeah.
That's a really interesting, like, it's literally like a mathematical equation that you figured that out to come to that conclusion. In terms of like just understanding more, I guess you sort of explained how you would visualize these, like in terms of understanding the actual importance that you touched on there of these connections. I think you mentioned something like a pith score or something that you would come up with. Like, could you explain that a bit?
Yeah, the pith score is just it's just the word I use to summarize. And pith being like not pith of an orange, so the little yellow bit in orange, but pith being this old school word, which is the essence of a thing. So the pith of something, get to the pith of the situation is kind of so a team has an essence, and this is kind of like just how you measure it. And that score is, we touched on it earlier, is just kind of like the sum of the connections within the group. So that's the
score out
measure,
100, right?
Yeah. So you measure that you can use to, and it's mostly, and it's really, there's no, the thing is, it's not about, it's really difficult because it's not about having a good score, right? Because there can be functional teams that have a low score in this thing. It's just to use as a reference point. So it's more about the improvement on that score. So if your score, your collective relationships between the team are X, then you go through some kind of process. It's just some way of measuring and being able to see if what you've done improved the connections between the people in the group.
And then one thing that makes sense. One thing the article mentions as well, and it really discusses like the impact of like social exclusion, right? We're talking about these different groups, maybe someone's, you know, really important. Other people, you're like, not necessarily why are they here, more like where can they go? And I think you talk about this social inclusion and the brain's response to it, liking it to like almost like a physical pain. Could you go into that a bit more?
there is a fascinating study that was done, or there's been a couple of studies, but one of them is fascinating, and it's really cool because it's got a really cool name, and it's called Cyberball, which sounds amazing. It's not quite as exciting as it sounds, though, however. And what they did is they put someone in an MRI scanner and they scanned their brain, and they gave them, because you can't move, they gave them made them play a game of what they called Cyberball. And basically there was a visual representation, and they were in a group of people, and you would pass the ball between each other, and you would share the ball between each other. And they were told that they were playing against other people. They were trying to, I can't remember specifically what they told them that they were trying to measure, but they said the other two people are also in an MRI scanner, but we have to visualize, we have to give you some kind of connection. So we're connecting you through this online game. And then they manipulated it so the person in the scanner stopped getting the ball passed to them, and people just passed the ball to each other and excluded the person. And the brain lit up, and there was a part of the brain that is the part of the brain that deals with responses to pain lit up. So the brain is responding in exactly the same way as it does to social exclusions, it does to physical pain. That's what humans feel when they're excluded from a social situation. And it's such a key part of human success, human history, human evolution, that we are these social creatures that have these connections, and our brain, and we've adapted to physically know that we should be a group of people, we should be connected to people, we should work together in a collective group rather than individually. I don't want to use the word pack animals, but that's kind of how the brain is responding to being excluded. And it's fascinating. And there is some other backup research that did similar things and found very similar kind of patterns and that's in that social book. These studies are covered in that social book.
That's really intriguing about. I mean, it makes sense, right? Everyone wants to be part of a group, wants to feel included, and then you sort of hear these other the influencers, things like this, these common these commentaries on no pain, no gain. You've got to do it by yourself, pick yourself up and, carry on. How does this, how can you really foster this sort of empathy then and really create these support networks within a team?
The core thing, I mean, it's difficult because the core of it is just being a nice human being. And and that's it's very hard to coach people and stuff, but just being inclusive, just talk. I heard and this is, I'm not going to talk about the company that this happened in, but I heard this horrific story once, and it was probably I'm playing it up that it sounds like it's going to be something really, really horrible happen, but it felt horrible. When this person told me this story, it felt horrible. This person joined a company, was told that they were joining a team, and said, look, unfortunately, we haven't finished hiring the rest of the team, right? So you're going to have, we'll give you some support. We have to, you're going to be a team of one for the time being, and you will, you'll have to work it out. And then some more people will join. So set up, And they had a manager that they were reporting to, but obviously they weren't working with that manager day to day. And they said, okay, we'll put you in this room with another team, so at least you're not on your own in a room, and cool. And then this person, first day at work, doesn't have a team to sit. Unfortunately, their manager was remote and stuff, so they've joined first day, they've got their equipment, they're onboarded, sitting in this room, trying to get on through their onboarding material. They said hello to the other people in the room that were another team, and they were sat there, and then they were like, oh, it's lunchtime, took their headphones off, put on the table, and everyone else in the room had gone to lunch and left them in the room. And I was like, ouch. And imagine how that feels. And you can feel that kind of pain in that stuff. And that person was at the company for 2 weeks and said,
yeah, wow,
I'm done. So it's building social connections is just about being a nice human being, thinking about people, putting us, just say, inviting someone to lunch, those kind of topics. And it's really easy. However, there is some stuff, if you want to, there is some ways that you can kind of think about this, because one of the core things is you can start to think about trust within a group, right? Because you'll have much more social bonds between people if you trust each other. And that's your social network, is a group of people that you trust, right? So the more that you trust a group of people, the more that you feel that you can trust a team, the better that social bond is, the more that you'll share, the more that also, if you trust more, feedback will be more honest. You'll be much more open to giving feedback and providing feedback, and that helps build between. And then there's things that you can do when you're looking at trust in an organization, and vulnerability is the key thing. It's about showing vulnerability, showing you're not a superhuman. You do have faults, and you're in it, and that's the trust will then build, and you can kind of build on that. There are some exercises you can do for trust building. Oh, and I'm really bad. Like I am that guy who reads loads of books and wants to tell everyone to read these books. But there is a really interesting book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which
what's it called?
5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it is, I thoroughly recommend it because it's really easy to read. It is just a little story that is told. And it tells about this team that doesn't trust each other, and then they build trust, and then they kind of formulate, and trust is the foundation of the model that is built in that stuff. And there's an interesting exercise where they share like some personal facts about themselves, and that kind of starts to build trust, and you can pick some exercises out from that book as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that was it is a horrible example as well. I mean, I work in sales, so people are, compared to engineering, people are a bit more obviously outgoing with sales, obviously dependent on the person and things, but still, if you and that makes it even more shocking. Like, I've been in that scenario where we get a new starter, and like suddenly they're just sitting alone, and you're like, how is this going to make them feel? They're not going to be part of that company. And then you think from an engineer's perspective, who they might be not the most social person, and be able to like express themselves sometimes if they're like a junior engineer starting at a big company, and that just makes the whole scenario even worse. Like,
yeah.
And going on to trust, yeah, sorry, you continue.
I would challenge your stereotype of engineers a little bit. I think it's a slightly unfair perception that we need to be a little bit careful. Please do. But I do think there is a trend in that. I mean, I don't think it's a trend. For my view, it's always I don't think it's an engineering trend. I think it's a knowledge worker trend, right? Where the core part of what you're doing is thinking. So when you start to build your skills, being social and your communication skills are kind of less important and you build. But I think these are the things that differentiate. We could go on to a really deep topic here about differentiating yourself as an engineer and how that's going to become incredibly important over the next couple of years. But whatever. It is not. I don't think it's an engineering trend. I think it's a knowledge worker trend, and it's and when you don't have to, if you don't have to sell something, those skills are less important. So the model kind of fits to different people.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. It's obviously it's a very well-known sort of opinion, I think. But even when
it's a stereotype. Yeah, it's a stereotype. And stereotypes exist for a reason. There is some foundation there, but you have to be careful with that stereotype.
Yeah, and when I think about the best engineers I've hired and represented, the main thing people go are when you ask what do you want from this engineer, right? It's not even the tech. It's like, give me a person who can communicate, who can drive initiatives across teams, is interested in this person. Yeah, and it's a big stereotype. Related to these trusts, you mentioned there's certain exercises for trust building. You obviously, as a manager, you want to be vulnerable. What are some of is there other key elements to building this trust?
I don't genuinely. I think vulnerability is the core thing. Vulnerability and authenticity are the two kind of things. It's like being open, sharing, talking about your failures, talking about what you really feel and what you really think, and kind of being honest and doing the things that you say and being sort of thing. And those are the core things that build trust. That is what when someone does what they say, tells you how they think and then follows through and acts in the way that they said that they're going to act, then you'll trust someone, right? I take a slightly different approach to this, but it's a risky approach. My view of this is I always start, whenever I start a new relationship, I push myself to start with my trust meter full. right? And go into any relationship and say like, I trust you 100%. Trust is yours to lose. It's very like, I know the normal default is to say, right, I need to build trust. You need to build trust, but I will go in with full trust. And most of the time, it works very well. There's one scenario, one gotcha with this approach is that people have to have a accurate understanding of their self in this relationship or their capabilities. Because if I go into a relationship with full trust, I trust you to do the things you're telling me that you're able to do. If you can't do them, then we fall apart, because I'll say, can you do that? And you go, yeah, I can do that. I go, cool, I trust you 100%, go and do it. And then if you do it, it's great. If you can't do it, we get in a bit of a tricky situation. And that's blown up in my face a couple of times, but it's a slight downside to something that works a lot. Like, it helps people. If I say I trust you 100%, I get the trust back very, very quickly. And it surprises people sometimes, but it's how I like to approach this situation.
That makes sense. I mean, it's almost like a little block of trust, and then you start with 100%. You sort of excavate, like, what's working, what are they confident in, what do they need help with,
and if you mess it up, you lose.
Yeah. And you mentioned that eagerness as well. Like, people can be too eager to impress and just, I can do this all by myself. Is there any other challenges that kind of arise when you're building trust, especially when you're thinking about these sort of complex structures that you have at Kelo and other organizations?
I don't think trust is that complicated. It's like difficult for sure. Like, there are situations where it's difficult, and it's something that's not like, because it's this kind of like trust talks about, it comes into play with like defense mechanisms and protecting yourself. And like, if you go into a new situation, not trusting someone is a defense mechanism, right? It's being like cautious, making sure you're not going to get kind of hurt, and kind of associating this thing. So there are some like human complexities to this problem for sure, but like, I don't think there's not much to talk about in terms of how you approach it. Like, I generally think vulnerability and authenticity is the key to solving these problems, and that helps you move to. I don't think there's any way that you can, unless you're going to take the approach that I take and just say like, I'm starting from here and we'll see where we go. Like, you just have to build it. You just have to go through that process like you would making any friend, any connection. You're going to have to build that trust before you ask them to be the best man or maid of honor at your wedding, right?
Yeah, it's such a simple but yet such like a complex word, really, isn't it? Related to obviously trust, this article, the article we're speaking about, it mentions like psychological safety within teams. And could you explain a bit about how, first of all, like, what is this sort of psychological safety in regards to this, and how leaders can really create this sort of safe environment?
It's the core thing about psychological safety is about how you treat failure, and how failure is perceived, and it just influences kind of the risks that people are willing to take. If someone feels safe and they know that, if they're gonna, and I think the kind of interesting thing about this, I think, and actually maybe we've talked industry-wide about psychological safety a lot over the last like 10, 20 years. It's been a big, big topic, and it's kind of gone away. Not gone away, but it's a topic we talk about less. And I think it's going to become more of an important topic, because I think it went away because of the marketplace for engineering. From an individual point of view, people started to feel very safe and secure in their jobs, right? Because there were so few engineers for positions. Like, it's like you really maybe didn't have to be the highest quality engineer to be pretty safe in your thing. So I think we started to stop talking about that, and people started to feel, well, maybe we solved the problem. Maybe people did feel psychologically safe more in their organizations, didn't feel like they were going to be penalized if they made a mistake, didn't feel like they were going to be fired, weren't going to lose their livelihoods. And also, interesting, because of the marketplace, even if you did lose your job as an engineer, you were likely to be fired into a pay rise, was the topic that people said a lot, right? Like, you're going to move out of, you're going to get more money elsewhere. but I think maybe we need to, I wonder whether in the next couple of years it's going to start to become a topic. We know from the VC funding crash that there are like salaries are dropping. If you look at, I know it's all anecdotal evidence, but there's a lot of talk coming out about like Bay Area salaries like halving over the last couple of months, and things really starting to crash in those like FANG type companies. Like things are significantly changing. So you're not going to be able to walk into a role as an engineer quite as easily as you used to. So it's going to maybe build up some of those anxieties and tensions and stuff that people had before into going into. And I suspect it's probably already happening. I've not seen too much of it, but I'm guessing that this kind of topic is coming up. So then we will need to think about how we make sure people feel comfortable failing, make sure that they like. It's going to be difficult for sure in this kind of industry where companies are struggling to be profitable, companies are having to downsize. Like you can only make so many promises at the moment in terms of job stability and stuff, and there are things that are definitely worth really thinking about these kind of topics again. But it's psychological safety comes from the human needs, right? It's like what do you need to feel secure? Income, protection, food, etc. Like, so at the end of the day, psychologically, probably very tightly coupled with your income and whether you're definitely going to be paid in the next month. I think is kind of key.
Yeah, and you mentioned the first thing you said is how you sort of treat failure. Like, let's say in a very engineering perspective. For example, for me, I've failed at a million things in sales, right?
Yep.
And it's only made me better. It can never be good, but if you're never be bad, sorry. If you with failure in engineering, I imagine there's like there's certain consequences and things. What do you mean by how you treat failure? Could you go a little bit into that a bit?
Yeah, my view on this and the way that I lead teams is, my view is like, unless it's gross negligence, which is a whole separate topic, and that's it. But you're taking it in the context of what's normally happening within a team and stuff. I would never penalize, never get angry, never like act in any negative way if someone makes a mistake for a first time. Any mistake. I start to get pretty annoyed if it happens repeatedly, right? But when it's like when the people make the first mistake, it's fine, and it's about learning from that, understanding what went wrong, what was the root cause, how do we make a plan to make sure it doesn't happen again, who's not whose fault is it, but why did it happen? Because blaming individuals is never particularly helpful. And you can look at it as all sorts of levels, because you can look at individual performance, and then you're kind of talking about performance reviews and like development plans and stuff, and saying like, okay, like you made this mistake because there was some knowledge missing or some experience missing. So how do we get you that knowledge and experience to make sure it doesn't happen again? Or you can look at it on a team level or an organization level. Then when you start to get into topic about like incident management and monitoring and mapping the mistakes that you made and looking for core technical or systematic or structural organizational issues that have caused these problems and solving them and making sure you're building again. So just looking at failure as a learning opportunity to make sure that you're improving, and it's a feedback cycle, right? You're just kind of trying to feedback and improve everything about your organization from failure. If you never fail, you never get better.
Some wise words for sure. And we mentioned before, this sort of the grit industry, when you were first introducing like this concept, and you mentioned sort of this resilience, the growth mindset that you were sort of skeptical about. What are some of the limitations, I guess? Like, how have people overemphasized this sort of individual grit, I guess?
I think there is like all of this grit and resilience topic is based on some really shaky fundamental research that has been. I mean, this is a slightly difficult topic, because I don't want to sit here and say all the research that was done on this topic is nonsense, don't listen to it, because critical scientific review means we should attempt to be critical about these topics and look at these kind of things. And you're always gonna, there's like a balance. These kind of things, you start with a viewpoint, and then there's a counter viewpoint, and the actual reality is somewhere in the middle. And over time, you do scientific review to come to the actual middle point. But I think on the grit and resilience industry, we're still at this kind of extreme at the moment. So I think that's why you need to be a little bit cautious about it, because if you look at some of the research around it, so one of the examples is, and one of the really famous studies around this was, they took some young school kids and they looked at them solving problems, and they said, here's a series of problems, and after they solved the problem, they did one of two things. They took one sample group and said, well done, you're very intelligent and you solved the problem. And the other group, they said, well done, you tried really hard. And they took those two things, and the ones they said they tried really hard then went on to complete more tasks and worked better in the group, right? So then the thing that you extrapolate from that is that it's actually the effort that helps you succeed. And that's the core thing about growth mindset, is like this fundamental concept of saying trying is what makes you successful. The University of Edinburgh tried to replicate this study in a real classroom environment 12 times and didn't see the results. So, and the initial study was done in a lab environment. So these results have never been replicated in a real life environment, which then you kind of like, is this fundamental story that a lot of people tell about growth mindset, is there a reality in that? And then there's some other studies and other things that have happened on top of that. And there's another example that's a little bit dark and a little bit hard, and I'll try and not make it, just trigger warning, there's a talk about suicide and death coming up. But the US Army took some of this research and implemented a program to try and help with post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And they built this resilience program, and they put people on it, and they try. And the difficulty here is, I think the goal of what they're trying to do is great. They wanted to try and reduce the post-traumatic stress and the issues that people had when they were leaving, like the military. But they went through this process, they applied. I think the program's been running for like 10 odd years. There has been no change in the number of people suffering from PTSD coming out of the US military, and there has been no decline, unfortunately, in the suicide rates of people coming out of the US Army. So the goal is great, and I think it's a very positive thing, but it hasn't seemed to have made any kind of impact. So there's all of these kind of bits, and that kind of start to add up to think, maybe the science behind this doesn't quite add up. And then it's kind of all these things like, whenever you get, this is going to get a bit philosophical, whenever you get money involved in the problem and people can make profit from it and sell these kind of things, you have to start being a little bit kind of critical about where the science and the evidence comes from these things, because it's very easy to become selective about that evidence to support a $1 billion industry that this kind of thing has turned into.
For sure. I mean, like, people have podcasts called the growth mindset and things like this, right?
It's big business. It's big business.
It's interesting. And I mean, it's quite surprising. I don't know, obviously, about the resilience program that you mentioned with the US Army, but PTSD, I mean, this is something, and like your internal engineering is wrong, right? You can't just rewire it with like socially or with words.
The concept, so the concept for this, to define it slightly, was not to solve the PTSD, was to try and make people resilient so they didn't suffer from the PTSD in the first place. So it was trying to make them more resilient, make them kind of bounce back quicker and not dwell on the experiences they had and kind of get into that situation. So it wasn't trying to fix that, because that is a psychological problem that requires therapy and genuine medical support. It was more about building the resilience in them before they go into those situations rather than after.
Right. Before, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because obviously the conclusions that we're coming to now, and we're seeing in the news, is people who suffer from PTSD. I mean, I don't know how we've got onto this topic, but like the use of like something that will chemically change their actual brain, like psilocybin and different programs like that. We're now seeing that are actually making at least some scratching at the surface at least. That's interesting about the famous study that you talked. Do you know what the famous study was called with the school kids
I can't remember.
And then the University of Edinburgh, 12 times they tried that. And
12 times they tried to replicate it and were unable to get anywhere close to the initial results.
Wow. And I guess we sort of talked about how you would implement these things where you foster this sort of empathy, collaboration, you foster this sort of collective intelligence within the teams and organizations. What about the sort of long-term success and organizational success and long-term like resilience of teams? Is there like a strategies and tools that you can put in place for this, or is it not that simple?
I don't know, like, good question. I think it's just like continually keeping on top of this. Like, I think the core thing is this is an ongoing topic, right? Like, and you can look at a team and you can look at the social connections in a team and go, okay, cool, that's fine. But like, if something changes in that team and they say, right, if you add a new person to that team or you take a person out of that team, the team is a different team. It's a whole new team. And that's definitely the case for this kind of stuff. Like, the second you take a node out of a network, you change the structure of it completely. And I think the core long-term thing is to just make sure that you are thinking about this all the time. Think when you're going to, like, companies are going to have to make layoffs in the future. Like, all companies, maybe not all companies, but I think if a company like Frontrunner, at some point, it's going to have to make some layoffs. Like, consider how that impacts the team. Make sure you're assessing it, measuring it, looking at what you can do, how you can help the team bounce back, just making sure you're checking in on these things every time you make a change in a company, which happens a lot. Just making sure that you are considering this at every single point and reviewing and looking at this internal strength within your teams at not every possible. Don't you still have to do some work, right? But like, it's just making sure you check in and do this review, quarterly or yearly or bi-yearly, like something to make sure that you're continually checking in on the strength of your team. I think is really, really important, because it's very easy to go, this team is great now, and then like 6 months later realize they've just completely fallen apart. Everyone hates each other. There is just no social cohesion within the team, because anything can spark a change. Like, it's almost impossible to predict what that could be, right? It could be, it could be something that is so outside of the control of even the work environment, right? Someone in the team, maybe there is a really important node within the team. I feel really bad talking, because in my head I've started to map this as a network, right? And I start talking about nodes, which is really dehumanizing people, and I need to get out of this habit of talking about nodes. But this person within the team is like, maybe they're going through something at home that they don't want to share, or they've got some personal kind of thing so you don't see it and no one talks about it. They're not sharing, and which is fine. Sometimes there are things you want to keep private and you don't want to bring them to work. Absolutely fine. And that could have a massive impact. That person could be this, we talked about, you saw this pattern where there was one node with one, I keep going with that one person with that everyone's really dependent on. Yeah. And maybe that person is really struggling and not providing the support, and you just don't see it. And then the whole team crumbles because of something that is such an external factor that you can't see. And you're just all of like 2 weeks later, you're like, what is going on? Like, the whole team has stopped functioning, and it could just be that single person that is just having a bad time, and you just need to move them, help support them, move them somewhere else, give them something else to do while they're dealing with that kind of situation. So you just have to make sure that you're on top of this and continuously reviewing. I think that's the long-term thing to think about.
And on that personal perspective as well, you mentioned, I believe in the article, like a loneliness epidemic, or you mentioned yes. It before. What's that?
This is so people are becoming more and more lonely. Like, modern society, technology, pressures, and I don't know whether you can say whether this is a good or bad thing, but like, decline of religion, and the reason I say decline of religion is a bad thing is historically religious communities were where people would connect, and now people aren't in church communities, they aren't in religious communities, so they have less opportunities to connect. Whatever your philosophical, political views on religion are, those connections.
Less faith is bad, right? Less faith is bad.
It's not necessarily the faith, it's about the group, right? People would have these social connections.
Right.
If you kind of think in a historical way, like how would people meet their partners? They would go to the church community and they would kind of like find a partner there, and they would build their social networks around that connection of people that they have. Whatever brings them together, it doesn't matter. There's been some really interesting studies that show that a CrossFit gym is just as good as a church in a community to build that kind of community structure. So whatever you believe in, like, it doesn't really matter. The faith itself isn't super important. It's the connection between the people. So anyway, these things are falling away. People are feeling much more lonely. The pandemic had a massive impact on this thing, and it hasn't bounced back since. So evidence shows that people are really struggling socially with connection. It's really dropping off. People, like, especially younger generations, for sure, and also older generations, interestingly, who are becoming less connected because talk about death a lot in this book, unintentionally. Like their friends and stuff are dying and stuff, and some people are living longer, so they're feeling a lot less connected as well. So there is a significant vibe of loneliness that is growing, or measurable loneliness that is growing in culture. So what I find really interesting about this topic is that if you start to apply these topics within your workplace, it should have a positive social impact on society as well. You can try and apply, build friendships, build groups, build things. There's some risks involved, and we have to be really careful, because what we don't want to do is abuse this, and we don't want to use, because you don't want to use, businesses shouldn't abuse this thing, right? You shouldn't be trying to build social connections to make sure people stay in the office longer, people work longer hours, those kind of things. But if you can build these social connections within a workplace, that means people will have more friends, they will have these connections, they'll have these social connections, and people should feel less lonely going forward. So there is this mutual benefit. If you think about the social connections within your teams, it should bleed out into culture and maybe try and solve this loneliness. And maybe, no, I was going to say, maybe businesses become the churches of the future. That sounds terrible. Let's not do that.
Like, we've gone too far. We've gone too far.
Yeah, maybe it replaces some of that stuff that has dropped off.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been happening for, well over 10 years, right? This interconnectedness, as people become more interconnected, like you said, like, people become more lonely, right? An older person might, like you're someone's granddad or something, might not be able to use WhatsApp very well, and so he's like,
and even if they can use WhatsApp, that's not how they've traditionally socially connected. That doesn't fill the same. It doesn't fill the same gap. It might to an extent, but it really isn't going to be how it's not how their brain is wired. Their brain is not wired to receive like dopamine hit through scrolling through social media or stuff. Like, if they get a text message, it's nice, but it's not going to be the same as meeting someone in person, talking to them, having that human interaction, for sure.
Yeah, and just to sort of wrap the core discussion up, is there elements to what, in terms of health as well and mental well-being, that Kilo Health is sort of invested in for that sort of short to medium future you could go into?
Yeah, we have a couple of products. So there's a few things that we're doing around mental health. We have an app called Sensor, which is trying to consider supporting mental health. And then one, I think, in my category specifically, we have a couple of products that are really interesting. A product called Greatness, which is looking at habit forming type stuff. So trying to support people make changes in their lives and support them in that way. And then we have another product called Effecto, which is also doing something similar around habit tracking, but also, like, just being fitter and healthier helps your mental well-being. So, like, most of the products that we have will have some physical benefit to you, which should help your brain is a muscle and works as part of your body, and if it's healthier, fitter, more productive, etc., you will feel better you will feel mentally better if you feel physically better.
Absolutely. And really great insight as well to end that section. I realize you've got, is it 8 minutes? Is it a very strict finish?
Yeah, I got 8 minutes.
Okay, we'll do some closing questions very quickly. Do you have a, oh, where's he gone? Hello.
Hello.
Do you have a morning routine that maximizes productivity?
I have a morning routine that's got nothing to do with productivity. I am a member of the 5 a.m. club, and I wake up early every day. But it's not a productivity thing. It is a health thing. I get up early because I go to the gym in the morning, and that is my morning routine. My brain does not work until 10 o'clock. It's really funny because I go to a CrossFit. Talk about CrossFit. I go to a CrossFit gym and I meet people in the morning, and I've actually started catching up with them socially outside of this, and they're like, Phil, you're a completely different person, like at 5 o'clock. I was like, yeah, like 5 o'clock in the morning, I am not, like my brain is not turned on. So I wake up early and then exercise. That's my morning routine.
Love it. What advice would you give to someone? And you sort of touched on this before with, that had this sort of changing of the tides, I guess it were, in the tech industry. What advice would you give to someone just starting out in tech as a junior software engineer, navigating this sort of space between loneliness, companies that have these, or companies that have these very good health benefits, companies that are like, oh, we have a ping pong table, or these different companies. How do you navigate these things? What's your advice?
My advice is it's going to become incredibly important in the future for engineers to be good at something else other than engineering. So look for the opportunities that put you close to some other competence. Whatever that is can be something that, whatever is exciting, is whether it's marketing, whether it's design, whether it's UI, whether it's like business development, finance, something. The people who are going to get easily hired as engineers in the future are the people who can say, like, I'm a great engineer, but also I understand how finance works in the business. I'm a great engineer. Also, I understand the users. I'm a great engineer. I also understand about hiring people, right? Like those kind of, that you need to find something else to augment your engineering skills. If you're just an engineer, very quickly, it's not going to be good enough.
And going back to what you were saying about the knowledge worker trend, why do you think that is a thing where knowledge worker industries have this consideration, or that they're not as sociable?
I think it's just because you have to spend a lot of time thinking and less time interacting with people. Like I think this is to do with the early stage of the career, though, because actually collaborative working, sharing ideas, thinking about stuff collectively is super, super important. But I think when you start your career, learning is all fairly individualistic. Like you are building your knowledge by doing and thinking rather than talking and sharing and stuff, and you're not trying to convince. I think it's this convincing people of ideas. Like in a sales role, you're trying to convince people of stuff all the time, right? In an engineering role or a thought, like a knowledge worker type role, that comes later on in your career, and you don't spend much time trying to convince people of ideas at the beginning. That's where I think this comes from.
Makes sense. It's more like, look what I can do, never mind, let me tell you what I can do. This is what I can actually do.
Or let me convince you about this thing, or like sell in my idea of this topic, because you still feel like you're learning and stuff. Well, you are still learning, right? You're still having to build that kind of knowledge and stuff before you can then go and convince people.
Makes sense. You've been in Berlin for 6 years?
7 years next week.
7 years next week. Fantastic. Happy 7 years. What's your favorite thing? What's your favorite food in Berlin?
Burgers.
Burgers. Just burgers? Any particular ones?
Just burgers. Berlin is incredible for burgers, and it's like got such an amazing range of different types of burgers. And you can get like filthy smash burgers. There's a place called Burgermeister which does an incredible smash burger, or you can get some like really good. And another place that I love is a place called The Bird, which does this like super high quality, they grind steaks on site for the burgers, and it is incredible. But it is like a heart attack on a plate, basically, these kind of things. So those are my two burger recommendations for Berlin: Burgermeister and The Bird.
Nice. And then what about any drink recommendations, either like bars in Berlin or just your favorite drink in general?
My favorite Berlin drink is mate, which isn't kind of a German drink. Obviously, mate is like a South American kind of thing, but it's so mate is so key to Berlin culture that I think it's such an iconic thing, and the caffeine and mate is my favorite Berlin drink.
Is mate the thing where you have like a cup and
Yes.
then like a little straw? Yeah.
Like the herb, it's like a tea that you have, but in Berlin, it's a carbonated drink that comes cold in a bottle.
Okay.
So Germans, like a lot of things, they've taken something from someone else's culture and they've completely
They've re-engineered
it to their own needs. So it's like a carbonated fizzy drink. When you first taste it, it tastes like an ashtray. It's an acquired taste, but it is, once you get over that, it's amazing.
It would make sense why mate is so, I guess, culturally entwined in Berlin, because there's loads of Argentinians and things like this that have traveled over. What's your favorite country to visit?
Okay, favorite country to visit. This is going to sound weird. My favorite country to visit is the UK. So coming back and visit, because obviously I'm from the UK originally, so coming back and visiting, I love it. I think that there is, like, as a tourist, it's like London as well as a tourist. I could never live in London, but London as a tourist is an amazing place. So London, weirdly, London is like, UK and London are my favorite countries to visit now.
Nice, perfect. And then the final question: any feedback on this podcast, mate, just personally?
I'm really enjoying the conversation. Whether, like, how much of it stays in, and whether we got a bit deep on some of the topics, and whether they stay in, I'll be super interested to see. But I really enjoyed it. I think it's a great conversation.
Nice one. Thank you so much for joining me today, Phil. I know you got to run off. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. And people should check out this article that we've obviously been referencing as well. And yeah, I look forward to the future conversations with yourself, and good luck for your rest of your journey at Kilo.
Cool. Thank you. Much appreciated. Really enjoyed it. See you soon.
Thanks for joining us today for my second episode of Source Talks, the Tech Lab. I'd like to thank Phil for joining me and his really insightful contribution to our conversation. It's been really intriguing to hear about his journey, the article that we were referring to, some of the concepts around that, and also his opinion just on the wider tech space and the world in general. It's really interesting to learn about these values. Tune in next time for more insights and discussions with engineering leaders. We've got 2 episodes lined up as it goes, so we're up till June. If you'd like to be involved in this discussion, you are an engineering leader, CTO, director, whatever you might be, and you'd love to have a conversation like these and get involved and share your own knowledge, share your own insights, we'd love to have you. Please send me a direct email or direct message on LinkedIn. Very simple to get in touch. We really hope you enjoyed listening to the podcast today. You can listen on all major streaming platforms. You can watch the videos on YouTube. You can listen to the podcast through our website. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify. You can find us on LinkedIn at Source Technology, and online at www.source-technology.com. If you're interested in joining this community, like I mentioned, or sharing your stories, generally just kind of being involved, we'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your feedback on how this podcast might have been of value to you. We can't wait to share more conversations like this, so we can really take ourselves to the next level of understanding. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.